Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I think we've arrived at the particularly high energy part of the afternoon. Is that a fair summation of where we're all at? Raise your hand if it's more than an hour since you last took in caffeine. Yes, okay, I can see we're going to have a problem. Raise your hand if you've heard of and or are a reader of the Register. Hey, that's pretty good actually. Thanks for that, guys. A little secret, every time you read a story on the Register, my children get a bowl of rice. And if you click on an ad, they get a shoe. So I always encourage people to click on 2 ads because otherwise we end up with a lot of left shoes. And that doesn't go down well at all. Now, I've brought along today this magnificent item, made in China ceramic mug bearing the Register logo. We only ever had 240 of these made in Australia. And I've personally broken 7. So there just aren't many of these left. I can testify that they hold coffee very, very well and occasionally tea. And I'm willing to give away this mug to you today for the best question or the wittiest interjection. So this...
Do we get to compete?
Yes.
Oh, excellent.
So this amazing thing. So on...
Could I have it in blue?
No. No. Nor will it run Linux.
How about NetBSD?
Yeah. Entirely. Oh, did anybody say there was a new version of OS 2 released last week? How weird is that?
How many people have tried it?
Too few. Okay, so we have today on the panel chaps from Google and Microsoft, and we were supposed to have somebody from AWS here. And as it happens, I asked my colleagues in San Francisco, I'm running a panel on containers, and there's AWS and Google and Microsoft on it. What should I ask? And our San Francisco editor, Chris Williams, said, you should ask AWS, are they really serious about containers and what on earth are they doing in this space? And lo and behold, AWS aren't here. So I think that question has more or less answered itself. They're not a sponsor, so apparently I'm allowed to say that. But the other question that the guys in San Francisco did want me to put to the panel is, as you start to build out your containerised stacks, they begin to look a little bit like you're tightly coupling what you do with containers to your particular clouds. And that this, might start to discomfort developers who worry about the dreaded lock-in. What do you say to that charge, gents?
Sure. I actually think it's quite the opposite, honestly. I think that what we're seeing increasingly is people are using containers and container technology to go to on-prem or to go across public clouds or between public and private cloud. I think that really, with Kubernetes, you can basically run the exact same definitions of an application anywhere. So I actually think it's quite the opposite.
Yeah, I'm going to basically second that. In that there are a lot of, I've personally spoken to customers where they're running Kubernetes on on-prem clusters, and they're able to easily port those applications over to public clouds if they want to, as long as that meets their requirements. So portability is not just some term that's thrown around, but it's actually happening in reality. And the whole point of containers is to ensure that developers focus on their applications and not on the infrastructure.
I think to that point, you can look at something like Helm, where you can deploy MongoDB, which needs persistent volumes, and that exact same chart works on multiple different public clouds, on-prem if you're configured right. So I think that's really a fairly significant application to be able to deploy with the exact same configuration no matter where you go.
Okay, cool. And that's not Elm, the...
Not Elm, not the...
Not the old school mail client.
Although that is a product of the University of Washington, where, in Seattle, where I know. So
okay, cool. Now, we've got lots more questions coming in here, and thankfully, somebody has just boosted the point size on the screen that I can see here. I've got a middle-aged man's eyes, and let me tell you, that's fabulous. So a question here we have is, who asked, do you have stairs in your house? Who submitted that?
32 stairs from the street to my door.
Hands up. Okay, that's yes, for what it's worth, but not many, and it's a one-storey house. Okay, what are the biggest unknowns or flaws or problems in the Kubernetes world, and how are people attempting to solve them? That's from Anonymous.
So some of the challenges that I've heard frequently from customers is around having like complete deployment journeys. Like Kubernetes started with being like a really technical project, and that like you got these amazing concepts that sort of start making sense once you know all of them. But then developers who are starting to look at Kubernetes or any other orchestration system are starting from a point where they know how to build their applications and they know how things used to work in a VM world. So there's this gap between what they do today and like what they have to do to get into a container world. And that's sort of where there are some challenges. Like Brendan today mentioned about how are SSL certs being handled in production. So there are like such scenarios like that which are not obvious, and there isn't like enough technology yet that sort of simplifies that whole experience.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I would second that. I think getting started and getting started in the right way, and getting started in a way that it's a learning path, right? So like there are plenty of easy to use commands that will get you started, but don't necessarily leave you in a place that you can evolve forward. That's a big challenge. I think we were just having a big talk with someone here earlier about how do you have the right path where you hide enough of the complexity, but like, yet you teach enough of the objects that people can have a linear scaling where they don't have to suddenly sort of dramatically shift the way that they're managing things. I think that's a big challenge. That's still an open problem for people to solve.
Okay. There's a related question here from Luke Bond. Give us a wave, Luke. There he is. Thank you, Luke. Luke asks, what do you think is the least mature aspect of container technology today, and what do you think needs to be done about it?
To me, it feels more about like solving multi-tenancy in like a large-scale cluster, because it's very easy to like spin up clusters in public clouds, and so you don't really have to solve that just yet. But it's starting to become a problem where people are seeing the benefits of Kubernetes and like they want to bring in more and more workloads into that. And then now, like, what's the multi-tenancy story? And
yeah, I think sort of echoing similarly. I think identity is a really interesting challenge. I think we don't have a really strong notion of container identity. What is that running process? It's probably not. It probably doesn't inherit all of the credentials and identity of the person who created it, but we don't have a good way of representing that inside the system right now. I think that's a pretty big challenge.
Won't blockchain just automatically fix that as soon as you think it?
Blockchains? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I know. Other buzzwords. Yeah. Insert other buzzwords here.
Okay. One of the things that I get told by kind of old school infrastructure vendors is containers are great, but they're better when they run inside a VM because you're already tooled up with all of the processes and the automation and the skills to run a big fleet of VMs. How do you gents respond to that idea?
In the public cloud world, you are sort of using VMs, right? Like that's the abstraction that public clouds provide typically. They don't give you access to the machines that they have. So that's sort of becomes a necessity. But then if you have the liberty of like managing your own machines, then once you get rid of the virtual machine abstraction, then you get a lot more performance. You're no longer going to have the virtual machine overhead. You have one less thing to manage. But again, like it all depends on what you're building for. Like maybe the virtual machines give you some more like security boundaries that are necessary for your given scenario. If that's a necessity, then that's great. But if you don't have such a need, then you don't really need virtual machines.
Yeah, I think security is really the only real thing that a virtual machine brings for you. And I think that if you look at some of the work that Microsoft has done lately with Hyper-V containers, trying to build a tight hypervisor-based container, or the Hyper folks separately with things like KVM, you're starting to see people actually trying to take that security boundary and wrap it around a container in a tighter way so that you can sort of have some of the container features in terms of spin-up time and lightness, but still have the security boundary there. I think that's definitely the value add.
And your existing sysadmins and ops guys understand the world of Hyper-V. And it's hoped, as I understand it, that their skills remain transferable. There's just different stuff going on inside.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think that in that context, you're going to see Kubernetes and other things managing those containers. Like, they're still going to be managed via an orchestrator. So I think people are still going to need to start thinking about operating orchestrators. Although I think that's a net win, ultimately, for everyone.
Okay. So Nick has chimed in here with a question. What is the most effective way to secure a container?
That's a big question. Because, like, security means different things to different people. Like, I see the word security being thrown around, but it could be applied to so many different contexts. Like, some people, it's like just saying that containers cannot talk to each other unless they are supposed to talk to each other. So it's like network security. For someone, it means that they should not get access to any more APIs than what they actually need on a shared kernel. Or it could also mean identity. It could mean a whole bunch of things. And so, I mean, the best way to secure a container is actually know what's running a container and like know your stack and like spend time on security. Just don't assume that it works.
I was going to say don't run anything. And I think but I mean I think that's actually in some ways the point, right? It's like there's this trade-off between usability and security, and like the most perfectly secure system is the one that doesn't do anything. But we have to make, obviously that's a silly system to build, and so we're constantly trying to find that slider of how do I build a usable system that is secure enough for the threat models that I think I see coming. I do think that there's some value with a container because you have transformed things into an API that were once a bunch of imperative commands that were lost, and so suddenly I can do things like scrape across my orchestrator and find all of the different images that have vulnerabilities in them, you know, old versions of MySQL or WordPress or whatever it happens to be, and send emails to the people who created those things and say, hey, you better update that. Much harder to do that if someone, you know, downloaded a tarball into a VM and you have no record of, you know, what is running on that machine.
Talk me through records of things in containers, because when people say to me that I'm going to build an application that's composed of a whole bunch of containers doing little things, and I'm going to orchestrate them into something bigger to get a bigger outcome, and I'm going to be summoning and snuffing out those containers n times a day, how do I know when things went bad?
Well, that's why Google has a rule that like monitoring is a prerequisite for launching any applications in production. So you need to have a monitoring story before you launch your application. It doesn't matter whether you're running in containers or just on the virtual machine.
Okay, and when the financial regulator knocks on your door, what happens then?
Well, I think there's some degree of opportunity here to embed this stuff into the cluster itself, which is some of the things I was talking about. So you can say, like, look, you know, every single machine is bastioned off, and we don't give SSH access, which tends to make regulators happy. You can talk about, you know, some of the things that people are doing with network security policy in order to isolate different namespaces from one another to ensure that only certain kinds of containers can talk to other kinds of containers. So I think that stuff certainly helps. I think that there's a meta level thing here though as well, which is that the more, and you see this, the more you lean on automation to ensure that your app is healthy and successful, the more the wheels come off when it turns out to not work out, right? And so I think it is the case that we need to do a better job explaining in many cases why the automated systems, the autoscalers, the load balancers, why they made the decisions that they made. Right? I don't think we have, I think in particular, eventing in Kubernetes right now is pretty ad hoc and not nearly as verbose and sort of principled as it should be. And so I think there can very well be situations where it's very hard to understand how you managed to get yourself into the situation that you were in. Not with your application even, but with the systems that are running your application.
Yeah, that's a good point in that, like, even though Kubernetes is adding audit logging, for example, that doesn't take care of the decisions that the system makes by itself. Like, it's only trying to answer this audit question and that, like, who made the changes to the system, but doesn't, like, it's not responsible for, like, answering why the system made a change.
There's a question here from, scrolled off the bottom of the screen. No, there it is, from Anonymous. Thank you, Anonymous. Love your work. What is the single most common mistake that companies make when embracing Docker?
Not knowing why they're doing it. Or doing it because like it was on the cover of CIO magazine.
Or because their boss read about it in an airline
Well,
magazine.
that was what I was going to say. I've actually yet to see containers in an airline magazine. Has anyone seen containers in an airline magazine? But that means we're just not quite cool enough, I guess. But definitely, I think, because their co-CEO at the golf club or whatever mentioned containers were awesome, that's probably a pretty bad mistake reason for taking it.
I know a developer who rebuilt the website of a glossy fashion magazine in containers, just because.
Right.
And it worked pretty well.
I think certainly if you're a developer and you want to learn a technology, having a project is a good way to learn a technology. But if you're running a business and you're making a technology decision because it's the new cool thing to do without having a really clear understanding of what the operational pain is for you that you're hoping that it solves, it's probably not. Now that said, I suspect most businesses have operational pains that containers will make better. But being clear about those before you step down to the journey is really a good idea.
Yeah, I think I'm going to second that in that containers are not a necessity in that you need to know what you're actually trying to achieve with containers. You don't really need to use them unless you have some problem that it's trying to solve. And similarly for Kubernetes, for example, if you're running a single app, a single web server that's serving just a few hundred users, maybe you're just better off running the web server on your own machine or running on App Engine or something like that. So you need some scale for these orchestrators to actually make sense.
Okay. Now, I'm changing the rules now, everybody. Interjections get double weighting in the race for the mug.
Retaining your developer is probably a legitimate business reason, though.
No, that's true.
So there is some aspect of you don't have the scale, but you'd like to keep this guy for less than 6 months.
Although I would ask, the developer as well needs to figure out why they wanted it.
Seriously, you're going to let the whole organisation's technology strategy be tugged around by whether or not a guy's going to stay in this chair 6 months?
It's more than once.
Yeah, it has.
More than one company, and that's how they retain their staff. I mean, if you're in a really boring business and you have one developer and he's about to leave, and this is the one wedge you have.
Everyone hear that? The suggestion is that if you're a one dev shop, it's painful to lose that person, and if they want to effectively code in frilly underwear, then you let them code in frilly underwear. We've got a question / interjection out the back here from the gentleman with the fashionable beard.
Saying to someone, well, you're going to drive the business decision because you're a crybaby or just you're acting like a child.
Yep.
So the business will want that.
Well, that's a business decision.
Works for the USA.
The thing is, it happens more than people are willing to admit. So you've got to think about it that way.
As people want to retain operations, people are playing on this like.
Yeah.
And that's not.
Yeah. Okay, what else have we got on the board here? Well, the question with the most upvotes is, where can I buy DevOps 2.0? My boss wants to know. You can. Oh yes, the gentleman from Rancher is saying that he is a vendor of DevOps 2.0. Just keep clicking on ads in the register, I think, is the answer to that one. You'll get there eventually. A couple of specific questions. Vishnu, you used a shell playback tool in your presentation. What was it? I want to use this to pretend to be WFH.
Props to Tim Hawken.
Yep. So
Yeah.
it's actually a tool that's there in the contrib repository in Kubernetes organization. It's Tim Hawken who developed that cool tool. It's basically replaying every bash command. It's printing it out before actually running it.
GitHub.com/contribs or Kubernetes/contrib/micro demos.
Yeah.
And it's a mix of tmux and PV.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Tim did some sort of shell magic.
Yeah.
We all just ripped it off.
Yeah. And we all got it to work on Mac.
We all
Yeah.
made respectful contributions to an open source
That's
project.
right. We all made respectful contributions. I made sure
Thereby
I maintained his copyright header.
Thereby nourishing the community for the benefit of all. Repeat after me.
Sorry, what? It's github.com/kubernetes/contrib/micro-demos.
Yeah.
And then there's a bunch of shell script in there that you can sort of derive from. And as Vish says, it doesn't work on Mac. You have to do a little bit of tweaking to make it work on
That's why I
Mac.
have a fork, and I haven't upstreamed that yet.
In journalistic circles, where we know everything about everything and nothing about everything at the same time, Docker is sometimes mentioned as the next Netscape. Pioneered a market, very good product, is trying to do a hell of a lot really fast, but doesn't quite seem to have a way of making any money, and therefore looks to be on shaky foundations. What are you guys hearing in the community about how much reliance one should be placing on Docker, given its stubborn inability to do anything like make money?
Well, I think the great thing about open source is that the community, I think the technology and the tool has hit such a nerve that it's going to continue no matter what, right? And so I think that I wish them the most success that they can have, but I think that the great thing about open source is that even if things change, even if they decide that they're going to do something else, or anyone really in open source, decides Red Hat or Google or anyone decides to do something else, the code is still out there. And if there's a sufficient community of people who are interested in it, it will keep going. And so I would say that I wouldn't have any concerns at all about taking a bet on the technology because I believe it is such an important moment in the history of computing. It's going to continue no matter what else happens.
Yeah, and that's sort of been true for most open source companies, right? Like there haven't been a lot of companies that are based on open source software that have made a lot of money. So it's a challenge. Like Docker is great in that like they sort of like started this whole container revolution. They're building lots of cool products. They're listening to their customers and they're building things that people want to use and like developers want to use. But since it's all open source, the monetization strategy is, it's been proven difficult over time, right? So.
Yeah. Well, everyone remember Netscape?
Yeah.
Who? Yeah. Back when browsers had animations in them for no reason whatsoever. We should really bring that back, I think. Here's a very penetrating question. Can you say hi to Wade for me? Sure. Hi, Wade. That was hard. What else have we got? Is it true we're all being brainwashed into thinking Kubernetes is the best orchestrator at this conference?
Yes, you are. The Wi-Fi in particular is.
I, for one, heartily endorse Kubernetes and whatever it is, and steering wheels. I'd like to talk about container OSs. There are so many of them out there. Every week we hear about a new lightweight OS for containers. How do you pick one? How do you go about comparing their merits?
Well, you have different container OSs, but at the end of the day, the common goal that they're trying to have is that they're trying to minimize the number of different moving pieces within the operating system. So they're trying to make sure the operating system is light enough, it's easy to update, then you can pick and choose what things you want to add, but you have to be very cautious with what you add. And then you bring in containers that has all their dependencies, and so you don't have to really worry about the operating system. Then it becomes a problem of DevOps or SREs or the managed service providers at the end of the day. Picking and choosing one, the most popular one now is CoreOS, and that's the one that's really well supported, but there are other solutions that are coming out there. So I think the community would speak for itself. It's going to become obvious over time which ones have the best systems, and since they are solving the same problem, I'm going to predict that there'll be cross-pollination of ideas between these different OSs because they're trying to solve the same problem essentially.
Yeah, I think it's much akin to saying what distro should you choose? Well, there's different reasons for choosing different distros, and from compliance certifications through tooling versus your use case. So I think that's going to be the way we go forward. People are going to continue to choose them based on their specific needs, but they all are going to share. Just like you've sort of seen systemd roll across all the distros, there's going to be shared technology that rolls across all of them.
Yeah, you just probably have a Kubernetes container optimized base image, and that's about it. You don't care about the base image anymore.
Okay. Here's an interesting question to Microsoft. Any plans to create or facilitate containerized ransomware or providing ransomware APIs? Now, I don't think we need to take that one head on necessarily. But it does, I suppose, raise the question, what would containerized ransomware look like other than nasty?
I did think that it was a bit of an achievement unlocked recently when I discovered that people are scraping the internet for open Kubernetes clusters.
Wow.
So I think that's it's not great. It's not a great achievement, maybe, but that, I think you reached a point of achievement when people have decided that they want you to use your API to mine Bitcoin.
You can't really comment on that, can you, Vishen?
Yeah, he's the one.
Direct from Microsoft. Here's a good question. Again from Anonymous. This guy is prolific. What are the biggest unknown/flaws/problems in the Kubernetes world, and how are people attempting to solve them?
I think we sort of went over the problem, right? Like, I think we mentioned that it's mostly around like trying to figure out how you'll get your application to work in a cluster. Like, okay, Kubernetes is great. You hear that buzzword every now and then, but like, how do you take your app that you're used to today and like get it to work in a cluster?
I take it in a slightly different direction, which is I think our biggest challenge right now is scaling the community. Right? We're going through a phase where the volume of code, the number of contributors, the number of people who are interested in learning about the system is just growing, and so I think that we're hitting the limits, I think, of what people have done on GitHub, and I think that we're really exploring and trying to figure out how you build a very, very large-scale project within the confines of the GitHub's approach to organizing projects. I think that's the biggest challenge. And then combined with the fact that now we have to also think about things that we didn't think about before in terms of suddenly we're having people who want to onboard and really deeply understand the system who didn't grow up with the system, right? Many, for a long time, all of the developers had sort of grown up and developed all the pieces as they were going, and so they knew the details deeply, and you didn't have to train new people to understand the details deeply. I think that's also a challenge that we're going through. But an interesting one. I mean, it's a very good one to have, I guess. There's a bunch of, Brian could give you the giant list. It's not about scaling. It's not like performance or anything like that. It's more like, for example, notifications on email can be incredibly noisy, right? Like most of us have turned off, or not turned off, but like basically filtered out all messages from GitHub because there's just too much. The combination of robot automation commenting on PRs and people commenting on PRs to retry our EDE tests, and like it just generates a huge volume of email. And so what happens then though is like there's some person out there and they're desperately wanting your attention on a PR, and they're just saying like help, help, and it's just lost in the sea of noise.
Yeah, and if you get assigned like 30 PRs, then you're going to lose one or two.
Yeah, the stuff just gets dropped. And then there's also some limitations. We could go into the details, which is not really what this is about. But there's some limitations in the organization and grouping model about you have to be members of organizations in order to have issues assigned to you and things like that make it hard to scale the permissions. We actually built out an owners file system. And like we've built a lot of our own tooling on top of GitHub to make the project be more scalable.
There's an interesting follow-up, again from Anonymous, who's working his fingers to the bone. What do you want to see happen next? What's on your container wish list to advance the ecosystem, advance the community?
To me, I think making containers secure by default would be a great thing. So application developers no longer have to think of security. It's just like taken care of for them. It might even be automated all along.
I would love to see even more and more of the resource isolation capabilities in the Linux kernel being brought forward into the APIs, as well as capabilities around dynamically adjusting running containers. There's a lot of flexibility in the kernel that isn't exposed through the current container, the node APIs that we should get exposed.
Intel kind of bent over backwards to make sure that its silicon was really good at supporting VMs. Is that kind of hardware innovation going to be necessary, do you think? Google's probably got secret CPUs doing this already. But.
So, the Kubernetes has a resource management side, and then we're working with Intel there. The community is working along with Intel's participation. And Intel is trying to push for supporting really high performance and performance sensitive workloads that are very well supported in their architectures. And that's happening with other people too. There's support for GPUs that are going in where you have NVIDIA and AMD and other people giving GPUs. So there's a lot of work happening there in getting the next set of workloads into Kubernetes, which are performance sensitive.
Yeah, I think that containers and container technology are going to become pretty much ubiquitous for running compute, and so I suspect that the same things that Intel did to make virtualization fast, they're going to want to do various things to make containers fast as well. But I don't necessarily have the laundry list of things that they're working on.
Okay. Now, as we draw to the close to the end of our allotted time, I can't quite even see that far. As I've said before, this middle-age caper is wonderful. What are the more creative and interesting things that you've seen developers do with containers that you think the audience could learn from?
Well, those are two different questions. Because oftentimes the creative things are not necessarily things you want to learn from. I really liked, a couple people have done first-person shooters. There's a first-person shooter that's against the Kubernetes API where you can run around and shoot your pods. I thought was pretty cool. I'm not sure it's useful, but it's pretty cool. So that's one. I was actually just wishing, I have actually a request for anybody who wants to do something in a creative way. I would love to have a Quake 2 plus ASCII art renderer container that I can run. So that's my request.
I've got an hour free. Give me your email address.
Exactly. It's already there. You just need to put it all together.
Yeah, I actually saw a demo at DockerCon where like Quake was live migrated over. So cool. That was pretty cool. Again, like games, it's more and more rendering.
Excellent.
I thought that the Whack-A-Pod thing you guys did for I/O or for Next was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's also
people
pretty
saw
cool.
that. They married up the
they could become like
Kubernetes API and one of these like whack-a-mole things, and you could whack the moles and it would kill a pod.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty fun.
Cool. Okay, gentlemen, well, we have indeed reached the end of our allotted time, and that means I have to give away the mug. First, can we thank our two panel members for their insight? And now I would like Anonymous to please come forward and get your mug. Doesn't work that way. I think that the gentleman here with the Rancher hoodie on was probably as vociferous as anybody, so congratulations, sir. You have this fine receptacle, impermeable receptacle. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the afternoon, and thanks for tuning in. Ciao.
Thank you.